So, now we've learned about, just to recap a little bit of where we've been, we've learned about Chotek, the original sculptor of the Jade Jaguar, 2,000 years ago. And then we read about Octavio Chotek Sanchez, a long, long time after the original Jade Jaguar was sculpted, more than 1,000 years later. He finds a sculpture buried in a cenote where perhaps originally the Jade Jaguar that had come to life had tumbled into the cenote with Kukulkan in sort of a death match. And now we move forward again, and we've learned about the thief, and the thief seems to have a problem with the Pasha. And we've learned a little bit about the Pasha and how the Pasha had killed Remesio's good friend Pablo. So we're going to pick up the story now, a little later that night, at the jail cell. Later that night, Remesio and Felipe were in the positions in front of the central courthouse. They had been there, watching in the darkness and waiting for the graveyard shift to come on. Felipe was dressed in a police uniform that the Pasha had obtained for him. The hat was too big, held up only by Felipe's protruding ears. The cuffs of his pants needed to be rolled up 3 times. To Remesio, he looked like a little kid who had gone into his dad's closet to try on adult clothes. Remesio's arms dangled in front of him with handcuffs convincingly around his wrists. The silence began to make Felipe nervous, and Felipe always talked when he was nervous, and he twitched when he talked. He began to tell the story of how he had come to Mexico City from his village of Pastaderos Verdes, or green pastures. And now a moment for Felipe's sad tale. His real name was Felipe Luis Munoz, he told Remesio. He had lost sight in his one eye at a young age because of improperly applied pesticides to the crops. His older sister was blamed for not watching him closely enough, and out of spite she took to calling him One Eye. The name caught on, and soon everyone in Pastaderos Verdes, including his family, except for his mother, teased him about it. His childhood was miserable. As soon as he turned 14, he left home and made his way to Mexico City, where he began a career of low-life crime. He had some distant cousins in the police force that didn't really care for him, but they would occasionally step in to help him if he found himself in serious trouble. Nevertheless, he spent plenty of time in and out of reform schools and jails for pickpocketing and petty theft. His last job had been as a numbers runner for a local criminal. He had met the Pasha one day while making his rounds. The Pasha had recently arrived from the Dominican Republic, where it was suggested by the local police that he had overstayed his welcome. The Pasha was now eager to establish a new operation in Mexico City, and he quizzed Felipe on the setup of the organization he worked for. When he learned that Felipe had cousins on the police force, he arranged a meeting with them. Mustafa knew that such an enterprise could not exist without police protection. Through Felipe's cousins, he found someone in the police department who outranked the policeman who had been protecting Felipe's employer at the time. The Pasha had a lot of money and was not afraid to use it. After giving a taste to some very high-ranking officials, as well as to Felipe's cousins for their help, the Pasha began operating the largest numbers game in Mexico City. Felipe had worked for him ever since. Meeting the Pasha was One Eye's big break, he believed. He was looking forward to getting rich and having a future. Now, let's get back to the story again. Remesio listened painfully to One Eye Felipe. The little man's spastic twitching was unnerving. Remesio wanted to grab his head with both hands to hold him still, but he was wearing handcuffs. He was also quite sure that One Eye didn't have much of a future with anyone, especially with the Pasha, who Remesio knew firsthand used people only for his own purposes. Though he felt a little sorry for One Eye, he interrupted the story to say, "Felipe, do me a favor and shut up." Felipe scowled back, and while scowling, he couldn't help but notice the unusual obsidian arrowhead that hung around Remesio's neck. He thought it was cool and imagined that he himself would cut quite a swashbuckling figure with it hanging around his own neck. "Hey, gringo," said One Eye as he reached for the arrowhead. "When this is all over, I would like to buy this from you." But Remesio quickly pushing Felipe's hand away with his own handcuffed arms, protected his arrowhead necklace with both hands and glared at the little Mexican. "I said shut up, and it will never be for sale." Holding tightly to the obsidian arrowhead, Remesio turned from one-eyed Felipe and winced. He thought back to a time before he had ever had the necklace, 13 years earlier, when it all began to go wrong. Now, just to think about the next part that's coming up, we've been learning some background about everybody, the Pasha, Felipe, and now we're going to learn a little bit of the background of the thief. And he's taking you back 13 years to when everything started to go wrong. So I want you to think about what all these characters have to do with each other. And as an author, why would an author bring in all these different characters? And a good reader would be asking himself how they're connected and where the story is going, and the ways that these people are going to be involved, and of course, what does it all have to do with the Jade Jaguar? So, make sure you click on all the links, answer all the questions, try to get a good score before we get to the next section.